If you got a Bible, turn to 1 Kings 12. 1 Kings 12:25. Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. From there he went out and built up Penuel. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert back to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and go back to King Rehoboam. So after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. And once he set one up in Bethel and then in Dan. And this thing became a sin to the people. And the people went as far as Dan to worship one there. Jeroboam built shrines on high places. He appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they weren't Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he'd made. And at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places that he made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar that he built in Bethel. And so he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar and made offerings. I'm going through Kings right now in a personal study. Some of you might think that sounds awful or really boring. My wife does not like the book of Kings at all. I find when I get to Jeroboam, I'm reminded of how hard it is for us to just obey God. It seems like it'd be a simple task. He gives you 600 plus laws, not really much room to wiggle around. Just obey Him. And yet for us today, it's a lot easier to just secure our own future. Especially right now with the economy being how it is. We went under the sequestration thing Friday, is that right? Anybody know anybody affected by this? I'm affected, so you know me. So everybody should be saying yes. I'm not affected in a very terrible way right now. But this is a really rough time for a lot of people. It's really easy to just secure your own future. You do what you have to do. It's a lot harder to trust in God. I have somebody who was close enough to my family that was invited to my wedding 5 years ago. This individual was talked into robbing a bank. No idea why he did it. He didn't need the money. But he wasn't just talked into robbing a bank by somebody who's bad. He was talked into robbing a bank by a cop. Come on, really? The police officer didn't need the money either. And this was an upstanding officer. But he found a really good way in and a really good way to make some money. So why not just secure your future, make a little extra money? And if you got a police officer, it's kind of okay. This is a person on the law. He's not going to turn you in. Well, he did it. He got turned in. And he's in prison. Why is it so hard to just obey God? Why do we feel like we can secure our own future? As I said, I'm doing a personal study of Kings. My wife loves the book of Psalms. Does anybody else like Psalms? Raise your hand if Psalms is your favorite book. What is y'all's favorite book? Just shout some out. These are all New Testament. Nothing in the Old Testament. Anybody have any Old Testament? Samuel. Okay, 1. Anybody have any Old Testament favorite books? Ruth? Anything else? Did you say Kings? Amos. Oh, Amos. Oh, all right. I find Kings fascinating. I don't like Psalms too much. Just because I don't like poetry. But I like Kings because I like history. And I like being able to piece together different parts of history. And the cool thing about Christianity is that God Himself works through history. And you can't understand Christianity unless you understand history. This is not a God who just made these events up or did them outside of events surrounding the Israelites. If you go back to Babylonian history or Assyrian history, you intersect with Israelite history. It's all connected. I love Kings for this reason. But you come to a story in chapter 13 that is just random as can be. Somebody asked what I was preaching on the other day, and I said chapter 13, man of God from Judah. Oh, you're kind of showing the cruel side of God there, aren't you? It's a pretty cruel story. So let me walk you through how we get to Kings 13. I want to address this story. When Kings picks up, it begins with David lying on his deathbed. This is in chapter 1, verse 1. There is a lot of speculation as to who wrote the book of Kings. Some people think it stands by itself. Some people think that Samuel and Kings are one book together. Some people think that the book from Joshua all the way to 2 Kings is one large narrative with one common theme. Now you might be thinking, who cares? It does matter. Because the themes of the book change if you have Kings by itself, if you put Kings and Samuel together, and if you open it up to Joshua to Kings, you get three different themes going through. So it does matter who wrote it. But in my Bible, Kings 1:1 starts with David on his deathbed. And there is another king who is going to be coming up next. Who is this king? Do we know? We would think Solomon. It's David's other son, Adonijah, that the writer describes to be like Absalom. And David has these domestic issue problems. He can't control his own kids. He can rule the nation, and he does an okay job at that, but you can't control your own kids. So Adonijah is taking over the throne. And by the writer's tone, you know that this is not good. And so Nathan comes in, David's prophet Nathan. If you don't know who Nathan is the one who came to David and confronted him about Bathsheba. So Nathan goes to Bathsheba and says, hey, this ain't good. You need to go in there to your dying husband, and you need to tell him that the Lord promised your son Solomon the throne. Now, there is nothing in Scripture that ever says God promised Solomon the throne. Some people think this is a conspiracy on Nathan's part, that he's going to change the course of events. Whether you think that or not, that is a whole different sermon. But Bathsheba goes in there, and she says, David, you promised me Solomon. And then Nathan comes in right behind her, the prophet, to confirm what she just said. And so after talking to David, David says, fine, do it. Let's get it done. So they bring Solomon in. And in the course of all this, David gives Solomon all these charges. He says, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, but really important, I want you to take care of some individuals I have in mind. There are some people that stood against my rule that you need to take care of. On top of that, you need to listen to God. And if you uphold God's laws and you uphold His decrees, just like He did for me, He will give you a stable throne. So Solomon takes the charge, he succeeds his father, and just like David told him to do, he takes care of these people who had a problem with David. You end up getting rid of David's old general, Joab. You end up getting rid of Adonijah, Solomon's brother, because Adonijah made a certain threat to Solomon, so he just dispatched of him. You end up getting rid of the current high priest, Abiathar, and replacing him with Solomon's choice for a high priest, Zadok. And you end up getting rid of all of David's personal enemies, despite the fact that they really didn't do anything wrong, according to the writer of Kings. At the end of this section in Kings, the writer says that Solomon's throne was secure. And all that means is, anybody who ever opposed Solomon, well, they just met a bad end. So now you have Solomon on the throne. I want to take you, turn to 1 Kings 9. I'm going to read you a few verses, but Solomon makes a name for himself as the king who constructs the temple. He is a king who asks for wisdom from the Lord. And twice in Solomon's life that the writer gives you, twice, the Lord tells him, I'm going to establish your kingship. Here's what you need to do. But you make sure you don't go against me. So 1 Kings 9, verses 6 through 9. Actually, I'm going to read you a few verses before that. Verse 4. As for you, if you walk before me in integrity of heart and uprightness as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a man on your throne. But if you or your sons turn away from me, and you don't observe my commands and decrees I've given you, and you go off to worship other gods, and you worship them, I will cut off Israel from this land that I gave them. Hang on. I will cut off Israel I've given them, and I will reject this temple that you've built. Israel will become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples, And though this temple is now imposing, all who pass by will be appalled by it and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this people? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God. And they brought their fathers out of Egypt and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord has brought this disaster on them. Now, after getting that warning twice, Solomon does not heed the warning. In fact, if you look at 1 Samuel 8, you don't have to go there, but if you look at 1 Samuel 8, as Israel is asking for a king, Samuel says, you be aware that if you get a king, here's what he's going to do. And he tells them, here's what's going to happen. Now, here's where knowing who wrote Kings comes into play. It's just a fun tip. If you take Samuel to be by itself, you can use Saul as that example. But the cool thing is that if you take Samuel and Kings together, that warning that Samuel gave them, everything he said, Solomon does. Solomon is that king that Samuel warned about. Solomon ends up doing all of this stuff, and he ends up getting his kingdom torn away from him. Not in his lifetime, but in his son's lifetime. So in the next section, we meet a man by the name of Jeroboam, who is not Solomon's kin, but he is an official in Solomon's army. In fact, he is so important and he's so good at his job that Solomon makes him one of the most important men. This is the kind of guy you want running your administration. But while Jeroboam is out working, one of the prophets, Ahijah, comes to him and says, hey, I got a message from God for you. Your king Solomon messed it up. So I'm going to give you a chance to do this right. The nation's going to split. They're going to have a northern side, and Judah's going to stay by itself. You're getting the northern side. You're getting 11 nations to rule. Turn to 1 Kings 11. Verse 34. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose, and who observed my commands and statutes. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you 10 tribes. I will give one tribe to his son, so that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, and the city where I chose to put my name. However, as for you, I will take you, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. You will be king over Israel. If you do what I command, and you walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes, and keep my statutes and commands as David did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one that I built for David. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt and stayed there until Solomon's death. Does that sound familiar? That verse? We just read something like that. God gave Solomon a chance, and he messed it up. And so God says, fine, I'm giving you the chance. You're going to be my chosen king. You're going to be my Messiah for that northern section. Don't mess this up. You ever wonder what would happen if people just listened to God the first time? I mean, imagine having a dynasty in Israel, not just Judah. How crazy could events turn out if people just listened to God? So next we meet Rehoboam, who is now Solomon's son. But we know that Rehoboam is going to get everything taken away from him. So nothing much is going to come out of him. So as the reader, when you see Rehoboam, you know that you've been warned. He's not going to last long. But what's funny about Rehoboam is how his kingdom gets lost. God has already said this in chapter 11, that he would tear away the kingdom. But the people come to Rehoboam after Solomon's death and they say, hey, look, your father put a really heavy burden on us. Please take that burden off. And if you do, we promise to serve you. Now, there's some speculation as to how old Rehoboam was when he took the throne. Regardless how old he was, 11, 30, 40, the answer he gives is an immature child's answer. What does he do? He goes to his father's advisors and says, hey, the people brought me this problem. What should I do? And what do his advisors say? Listen to them. He did put a bad burden on them. He put forced labor on them. He took a lot of wives. He didn't care about them. He made alliances with Egypt, the nation that put you in slavery. Don't do what he did. You win those people, they will serve you for your lifetime. How does that sound bad? So what does he do? He goes to his own friends and says, hey, Let me ask your opinion. What should I do with this? What do his friends say? Hey, look. You don't want to appear to be stomped on. They're going to push you around all your life. You know what you should do? You need to wear the pants. And you need to say, my father put a bad burden on you? Oh, it's about to get a lot worse. I'm going to make your lives miserable. And he does. And the people end up basically just walking away. The text says that when he told them this, they went back to their tents and they said, what share do we have in David? What part do we have in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house. Meaning, you're going to treat us like that, you're on your own. So Solomon dies, Rehoboam is now ruling, and Jeroboam returns. And even though he is now ruler, he kind of feels as if something is not going to go his way. The temple is in Jerusalem. And if they're going to go sacrifice in Jerusalem, that means that they're under the influence of Rehoboam. So, I can't have that. What if one of these days Rehoboam talks to him and convinces him to follow him? I mean, he's a pretty likable guy. What should I do? I'll just secure this for myself. I'll build my own temple. If I can't have that God over there, I'm going to build my own gods. And so this brings us back to our text. He builds these two calves, and he says, here, Israel, are the gods that got you out of Egypt. There's no point in you walking all the way up to Jerusalem to worship your God. Just come here. I'm going to put one in Bethel. I'm going to put one in Dan. So it's right in the middle of everybody. So now we have no conflict. We have nobody going back to Jerusalem. You serve me. This is Jeroboam's way of securing his own nation. So now we come to chapter 13. God warned Jeroboam that this nation was his alone and no other gods. And if he wanted security, all he had to do was follow God's laws. Despite the warning, he makes different laws for himself. He institutes festivals of his own making. He institutes when the festivals are going to take place. He institutes gods for himself. He makes his own temple. And so while all of this is going on, you have this random story that appears out of nowhere. That's incredibly cruel. In chapter 12, and I wonder at times, do you need this story? Because in chapter 12, you have this apostasy going on through Jeroboam, and in chapter 14, you have Jeroboam's son's death. So here's the punishment in chapter 14. Here's the apostasy. What in the world is 13 doing there? Do y'all know the story of 13? Kind of? I want to walk through it. 13 begins, by the word of the Lord, a man of God came from Judah to Bethel. Well, what's in Bethel? The new God. What's in Judah? The God. God sends this man to Jeroboam to give him a message. And the man enters the temple as Jeroboam is standing by the altar, and he says, hey, I got a message for you. There's a king coming for you. His name is Josiah. That name's important, by the way. A man named Josiah will come, and he will come from the line of David, and on you, he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who now make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you. He goes on to say that the sign that all this is going to take place, that altar that you're sacrificing on, it's going to crack, and all those ashes that you've burned are going to spill out. Well, you can't make a threat like that. If you can't make a threat on the Jerusalem temple, you can't make a threat like that on the Bethel temple. So Jeroboam says, hey, get this God. And his hand withers and cracks into this dead, withered hand. And I imagine it just causes silence. And he begins to plead, hey, you got to intercede on your God's behalf. Take this back. I can't deal with a withered hand here. And God forgives him immediately. No blinking an eye. The man of God makes it right. He had this withered hand for 5 seconds, and he just asked for forgiveness, and he got it. On the God that Jeroboam knows gave him these kingdoms. So the man of God gives his message, and Jeroboam is kind of a little bit taken aback by this, and he asks the man of God if he can come to have dinner. The man of God can't do it. If you go to 1 Kings 13, verse 8. It says, but the man of God answered the king, even if you were to give me half your possessions, I wouldn't go eat with you, nor would I eat bread or drink water here. For I was commanded by the Lord, you must not eat bread or drink water or return by the way you came. So he took another road and didn't return by the way that he came to Bethel. So it doesn't matter how powerful Jeroboam is. He got 10 nations. Doesn't matter. God gave you a strict law. Don't eat there, don't drink there, don't talk to anybody there except for Jeroboam, and don't even come back the same way that you went there. Easy to follow. Okay. Jeroboam is not the only one who knows he's doing wrong. Surprisingly, there is this other prophet in the north, where Jeroboam's at, who knows he's doing wrong. At least I get that impression, because when he hears about this man of God going to confront Jeroboam, what does he do? He wants to go find this guy, congratulate him. Tells his sons, hey, saddle up my donkey, I'm going to go find this guy. And he finds him under a tree, sitting there, and he says, hey, are you the man of God? I am. Hey, let me ask you back to my house to eat. I can't do that. I was given specific commandments. I can't do that. Oh, no, it's fine. I'm a prophet. God said that that you can come back with me. I mean, really, it should be okay. He's already given his message. He's already taken a different way back. He's on his way back. A guy's got to eat. He's got to drink something. And it's a prophet from God. Why would God send somebody? But the text tells you this prophet's lying. If God didn't tell the man of God to change his course, why would you give in to this deception? So he goes back to the home of the old prophet, and the two eat and drink and no doubt talk about how funny Jeroboam's face was when he saw that hand pop out. And then the word of the Lord comes to, not from the man of God, but now it's for the man of God. The text tells you that God said, you have defied the word of the Lord, and you didn't keep the command that I gave you. You came back and you ate bread and you drank water in the place where I told you not to eat or drink. Therefore, your body will not be buried in the tomb of your ancestors. On the surface, that's not a bad punishment. Maybe for me. I'm dead. I don't care where I'm buried. So hearing that, I mean, maybe it's bad because you want to be with your family, but I am sure that the man of God did not expect what happened to him. I'm also reminded of a story at the end of 1 Samuel. When Saul goes to the witch and he wants to know what God thinks. And she says, when she brings back Samuel, Samuel says, man, you messed this up. Tomorrow, you're going to be with me. And your kids, they're coming too. He gets the same thing almost. And I imagine the other prophet feels pretty bad because he's the one who instigated the entire thing. But regardless of whose fault it was, he packs the man of God's things back up, puts him on the donkey, and I imagine he had no clue as he turned that corner that lion was going to kill him. As he's going, the text says that he was on his way. A lion met him and killed him. His body was left in the road for all to see, with the lion standing beside him, watching. The deceiving prophet saddled his donkey and made his way to retrieve the body, finding both the lion and the donkey just standing there. The lion didn't eat the body. He just mauled and killed it and stopped. He didn't eat the donkey. The donkey was untouched. The text says the prophet picked up the body of the man of God, laid it on the donkey, and brought it back to his own city to mourn for him and to bury him, not in his own burial ground, but in someone else's. And then he said, he laid the body in his own tomb and mourned over him and said, alas, my brother. Can you imagine how hard it is picking up a dead body with a lion standing right there watching you? It's the same lion that killed that dead body. That's not fair. It's not fair. It really isn't. Why him? You have a pagan king making his own gods, ruling over this nation. And you kill the man of God just for getting something to eat? That's cruel. This death far surpasses cruel and unusual punishment. So I have to ask myself, why in the world is this story here? When you read the Bible and you go through these different books, one thing to keep in mind, you can either take two routes. Either the editor put all these stories together just to tell you some cool stories with no point linking them together, or every story has purpose that's advancing some point the writer wants to make. Keep in mind, Israel knew these stories. They were there. Why would you want to hear them again unless the writer's trying to tell you something, which means that 13 has to be there for a reason. When we talk about the fairness of God, this is an issue that plagues a lot of Christians. It makes a lot of Christians lose their faith. Anybody see the Hatfield and McCoy show on History Channel? Raise your hand if you saw it. Two of you. Okay. Y'all know the Hatfield and McCoy feud, correct? Okay. Well, Randall McCoy was a religious man. Really religious. Devil Anse Hatfield was not religious one bit. But Randall McCoy was. And as his family started to die off, his faith did too. And here's a man who, no matter what, he prayed, he said, everything is God's will, I just got to fight through it. And by the time his 10th person in his family died, how can God be so cruel to me? I've served you all my life, and you take away my family like that. It's one thing if it happens to pagan people, because they're not following Yahweh anyways. So they got what's coming to them. But your own people, in this economy, I mean, you should know somebody who is going to lose their job. Probably somebody in the church. You might even be losing your job. You might think, or you might have thought, how cruel can this be? You might know somebody in your family who has gotten an illness out of the blue and passed away, leaving you not only with the death of a family member, but a major burden to carry. How cruel for your own people. How are we going to deal with that? How are you going to deal with this prophet who was given specific instructions and he didn't really disobey that much? He just got deceived. And you sent a lion to him. Well, there are two things I feel that we can use to find justification for this story. Number one, the theme of obedience takes on a renewed importance with this story. Jeroboam, like King Solomon, was given a chance to have a sure house in God's kingdom. However, he finds it safer to secure that house by creating his own methods that draw people to him. I'm going to make my own God. I'm going to make my own festivals, despite the fact that the one God who gave me this spot said, if you just listen to me and don't do any of that stuff, you'll have a sure house. But he finds satisfaction in doing it quickly and for himself. Verse 33 says, and keep in mind that when he found out about this man of God who died by the lion, it didn't make any difference to him. Verse 33 says, even after this, after finding out about it, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways, but once more appointed 2 priests for the high places from all sorts of people. Jeroboam should perceive the importance of obedience by the way that God punishes his own prophet's disobedience. Point number 2, last point. Jeroboam and the man of God violate God's laws. As the man of God was supposed to recognize the old prophet's message to be false, since it encouraged him to violate God's law, Israel should recognize that they are being deceived by a pagan king. When Israel gets this book after the captivity, which is when I imagine they get it, I imagine they're going through some problems with leadership. What are we going to do now? The writer wants to tell you, hey, here's how you got in this mess in the first place. You were deceived quite a bit. One writer puts it this way. If a prophet died without mercy because he listened to the voice of a brother prophet who swore that he had received a revelation concerning him, how much more sore the punishment shall come upon those who reject the gracious covenant of heaven and go after false gods at the mere word of their king, who claimed no spiritual authority and acted only out of political motives. If that prophet got what he did for just a simple disobeying, how much more do you think Jeroboam's going to get? How much more do you think you'll get if you follow the people that you follow? Watch what king you put in place. For us today, how do we take this message? Who are we listening to? Who do we trust? We put our trust in our country, but do we put our security in our country? Our home is not here. We are called to seek our security elsewhere. Not our security in America, not our security in this world. We are called to seek it elsewhere. We are called to trust God, to follow His laws, to act and be Christ on this earth. We, like Jeroboam, have been given a chance to have a sure home in God's kingdom. However, we, like the man of God, have a tendency to give that up for the taste of something that's just pleasant. Let's all stand and sing.